So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this first NITheCS Micro-school of the year. Today's presentation is a very interesting one to get started with. It is a introduction to Plotly, which is a tool for creating interactive visualizations in Python. My name is Dean Brand. I'm the host for today. I'm a PhD student working with Professor Francesco Petruccioni, who's the director of NITheCS. Today's presenter is Amy Rouillard, who is also working with Francesco Petruccioni at Stellenbosch University as part of the quantum research group. Previous studies were a master's degree at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, where she focused on the development of robust control schemes for quantum systems on measurement-based feedback and coherent feedback techniques. She has since evolved her research to now focus on the intersection of physics, machine learning, and quantum technologies, working on machine learning tools which can assist in the discovery of new quantum algorithms. And having seen some of her plots and figures in the past, I know that she's the best person to be presenting on Plotly, which is a very exciting topic to get started with. So with that, I'd like to hand over to you, Amy, to get started. And if there are any questions or any comments, then feel free to drop them in the chat. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Dean, for that nice introduction. So yeah, as Dean said, I'll be covering Plotly, which is a tool in Python to create interactive visualizations. And I'm just going to jump straight to some examples to show you the types of things you can create using Plotly and to get you excited about it. So what's very cool about these plots is that they're all interactive. So you can hover over things and see more information. You can also click on legends. Like, for example, if I double click on Africa, it hides all other data and just shows me the data related to Africa. You can create lots of different types of plots, so line plots, also these chromoplots, which I'm going to cover today, which I think are really cool tools for showing worldwide data. So I think this is a really great tool if you're interested in something for data like storytelling. Because it's so interactive and because it has a very clean design, I think it's great for presentations and telling stories about your data. Okay, so I'll be running through this Colab notebook, and I have made the code available, so it should be public for anyone who has the link. So I'll just quickly share the link in the chat. So if you'd like to download it like now or after the presentation, like feel free. I'll share it again at the end for anyone who comes late. But yeah, you won't be able to edit it, but you should be able to download it. And if there's any issues, you can let me know. So Plotly is a Python library. It's open source, so you can actually access the code and make contributions if you like. It has a great community, so there's lots of resources on Stack Overflow. ChatGPT, of course, is good at writing code, so it's a well-used package. And some of the key features are the interactivity, as you saw. It's very customizable, especially when you get a bit deeper into the functionality. It integrates extremely well with other Python tools, especially Pandas. You'll see in the examples I'll show you, you literally pass your entire data frame to the Plotly function, which I think is great if you're already familiar with Pandas. And you can export your figures in a multitude of different formats. HTML is great if you want to preserve the interactivity. So for example, obviously, if you export it as a PNG, that will just be a static image. But if you export it as HTML, you can integrate it into your presentation and keep things interactive, which is really useful. And you might ask, like, why should you switch over to using Plotly if you're already familiar with Matplotlib and Seaborn and other Python packages? But I think Plotly obviously has this interactivity, which I'm sure you could achieve in Matplotlib, but probably with a lot more struggle. And the other advantage is like this nice, clean, modern design, which maybe is a bit lacking in Matplotlib. You have to do a bit more customization, to get things ready for presenting. So just very briefly, the setup and installation. So if you're using pip, you just run pip install Plotly. If you're using Anaconda, you would use your Conda install. On Google Colab, it's actually already pre-installed, so I don't need to do that step. But if you're running this on your local machine, you may need to install the package. And when we import the library, we actually choose between using two different parts of the library. So we can either use the Express library. This is more for like quick and dirty plots. But if you really want to have a high level of control over what's going on, you would go for the graph objects. So I'll mainly be discussing the Express, which is more than enough functionality for most applications. But I will briefly mention at the end some things about Plotly Go and graph objects and how you can use them, especially in apps. So yeah, very exciting. I will monitor the chat for questions, but if I don't see something, I'll get to the end. And if there's anything super urgent, like feel free to unmute and ask me. Okay, so here I've just loaded a data set that's actually available within Plotly. It's called the Gapminder dataset. And it's just an example, like toy dataset with a bunch of data relating to different countries and different years. And it gives us information about life expectancy, population, and GDP per capita. So that's the data that we're going to be working with. But yeah, you can imagine, anything of this format, any data frame, we can do the same operations. Okay, so I'd like to just cover some simple plots, like a line plot, a bar chart, and then lastly, the chromopleth that I showed earlier. So in a nutshell, this is how we create a line plot. So it's very simple. We do plotly express.line, and then we pass the entire data frame. In this case, I've just filtered it for country equals South Africa. So I'm just interested in plotting the data related to South Africa. And then you specify the variable shown on the x-axis by using the name in the data frame. So here I'm saying, please plot the year on the x-axis. And obviously, you need to make sure that this corresponds exactly to the name of the column in your data frame. So for example, if I use year with a capital Y, that's not going to work because year is with a small y in the data frame. Okay, so that is what we see here. Yeah, so also on the y-axis is life expectancy. And this is cool. I mean, this is great. We can mouse over different points, but you'll notice, depending on where I put my mouse, I do or don't get information. It's not super clear why, because obviously that's to do with the data points. So we can make that a bit clearer by using markers. So we can say markers equals true. And that will, as you might expect, add markers to our line plot. So now it's much more obvious why I'm getting hover information when I do. So something else we might want to do to improve this plot is add some text at each marker that makes it clear which year this data came from, because it's a bit difficult to read exactly of which year. Oh, sorry. My Copilot here is trying to do things. So I can say text equals year. And these functions are all very well documented. Like if you go into the documentation, you can find like myriad options. I think if I hover over here, you'll just see like there's at least, 30 to 50 different options. But I'm just going to showcase a few here. So if we set the text equal to year, then we'll get these nice labels that show the year of each data point. But you can see they're overlapping with the line, which makes them a bit unreadable. So this we have to fix using another function. Whoops. Called update traces. And here we're updating the text position to be the bottom right. So it's going to shift all of these little text labels to the bottom right. And there's obviously a lot of options. You can say bottom left, top left, and so forth. So you can see already the difference here would just give you a little bit of a taste for the difference between the express and the graph object. So if we were working with a graph object, we would probably be able to specify this text position already earlier. Whereas since this is just an express fast plot, we have to do something with a little bit of a workaround. So just be aware of that, is sometimes you need to do things in this way. We're using update traces. Okay, so now we can do something a bit more complicated and we can plot a bunch of lines on a single plot. And this is great. As I said, you can double click on a particular country and then see that country alone. And if I double click again, it will show all the data. So I can imagine, if you were telling a story with this data, you might say, oh, it seems like the GDP per capita across Africa has remained fairly stable, but there's some countries where like things peaked. And then you might want to zoom in on that particular country. Like, for example, I think this is Libya here. We can zoom in on Libya and then, have a look what happened there in particular. So again, it's very straightforward. We pass the whole data frame. In this case, I've just filtered for the continent of Africa. And I've also done this extra thing where I've specified that the color should be related to the country column in the data frame. If I comment this out and rerun things, you'll see the color of all the lines is the same, and we no longer have that nice legend on the side. So in most Plotly applications, you'll sort of be dealing with like X, Y, color, and then I think you can also use shape. So if there was an additional variable you wanted to highlight, you could also use like the shape of the marker. Okay, what else did I want to say about this? Okay, I think nothing about this particular line plot. Let me just check. Okay, no questions in the chat. Great. So bar charts are also very easy in Plotly. So here I've plotted the year versus GDP per capita. And I've taken the color to be the different continents. And you'll also see all of these bars are actually subdivided. So the data is for each specific country is actually still in there, which I think is really great. So if you wanted to change the label here on the x-axis. So automatically, Plotly sets the labels based on the columns in your data frame that you've selected. So here, wide was GDP per cap, which is not a very nice way of, we can understand that's GDP per capita, but if you were presenting this in a real situation, you'd want to update that to something a bit neater. So you do that with the labels parameter, and then you just specify it using a dictionary. So this is very similar to just if you had renamed the columns beforehand, which of course is also an option. So that will neaten things up a little bit. And then there's also two different bar modes. So at the moment, we're in the stacked bar mode, but we can also switch over to a grouped bar mode, which will place the bars related to the different continents next to each other rather than stacked. So depending on your application, you may or may not want to do that. So if I go back to the stacked mode, and I mentioned earlier about the fact that the information about each country is still here, but when I hover over a particular piece of the bar, it's not actually showing me that that's related to the country. So how we can fix that is we can specify the hover data, which is a list which tells Plotly which data you'd like to be shown when you hover over a specific item. So let's specify the country, and let's also specify the GDP per, I got it, camel case here, correct, per cap. Okay, so now when I hover over a particular bar, we see, okay, it's the continent of Asia, it shows the year, but it also shows the country at the bottom, which is great. So if you have additional information in your data frame that you don't necessarily want to numerically plot, you can still include that in this hover information, which I've found like extremely useful. And just one other small, I think, update we can do to improve this figure is let's just separate out some particular continent. So just let's say Asia, for example. So these bars are sorted in the same order that they appear in the data frame. So I think that's alphabetical order, if I'm not mistaken. So yes, it seems, yeah, it's in alphabetical order, which is not really that useful. So if I sort the data frame by the GDP per capita, and I'm going to make it descending order, and we recreate the figure, then Plotly will respect that ordering in the data frame and then actually organize the bars according to that ordering. So then now suddenly it's very, very easy to quickly see, okay, in Asia, Kuwait for almost all the years had the highest GDP per capita. So that can be super useful. So if you do any kind of pre-processing on a data frame, that will carry through into your bar chart. Okay, so let's move on now to the chromopleth. So I really love these. I think they're so cool, and you can scroll, you can zoom in on them, you can do all kinds of nice stuff. So let's see some of the customization we can do here. So I think first of all, I want to mention that you have to specify a location mode. So there's a couple different location modes. You can do it by country name. In this case, in the data, we have access to the ISO code, which I think is a much more reliable way actually of doing these things. So we put it in location mode ISO 3, and then we say that the locations are stored in the ISO alpha column in our data frame. And I've set the color to be determined by the life expectancy. And I've also selected a specific year. So I'm just plotting things for the moment from the most recent data in the data frame, which is 2007. So we probably want to communicate that information. So we can add a title, which is obviously true for all the other plots that I've shown. You can also add a title in this way by just setting the title parameter. And yeah, now it updates automatically. I have the population of the world in 2007. Again, we have a bit of an issue with the hover. So when we mouse over these different countries, we don't actually see the name of the country, which, for some continents that maybe we're not super familiar with, that's not great. You don't want to misname a country. So we can specify the hover data as we did in this case, or we can use a different feature, which is the hover name. So we can set the hover name, and you can see here, it's already anticipating what I want to do. So we can set the hover name to just the country, and we can run that. And you can see now when I hover over South Africa, it clearly tells me that that's South Africa. So that's a useful feature. And of course, Plotly has a bunch of different color palettes that you can use. So just to show you an example here, since we have a continuous variable, which is life expectancy, we can use a color continuous scale. So here I've just gone and looked at the documentation, and I've found there's a color palette called dark mint, which looks like this. So I would really encourage you to go have a look at the documentation. They have really great documentation, and they'll show examples of all these different colors. And if you were showing a discrete variable, then they also have a set of like discrete colors. Like for example, what we saw here in this plot. So this is not a continuous color scale, but a discrete color scale. Okay, great. I think I'm doing really good for time. We have like 10 more minutes. So the last thing I wanted to cover was a bit of some of the advanced features of Plotly. So I've mentioned the graph objects where we have a high degree of control, but also these graph objects integrate really well with apps like Dash, which is also a library written by the same group who created Plotly. But it also, if you're familiar with Streamlit, you can also integrate your Plotly plots in Streamlit very easily as well. So in this case, Dash is actually not installed on Google Colab, so I had to install it myself. So we can go ahead and skip that. And I'm not going to go too much in the code. I'll come back to it. But what this is really useful for is, in our previous case, we had our plot and we were able to see the life expectancy for 2007. But what if you want to show interactively like the trends over time? So just with this very simple app, it's not a lot of code. We now have this nice slider that we can move along, And as we move it, the plot will update. So if I jump all the way to 2007, you can see how the life expectancy across the whole world has increased. Oh, sorry, I have to drop the slider, has increased. And maybe with a few African countries lagging a bit behind. So I think these kind of little interactive apps can, you can make them with pretty low effort and you get pretty like nice, impressive results. So maybe I will just spend 1 minute saying a little bit about how this app is constructed. So we initialize an app, and then you have this layout method. And inside the layout method, you specify which objects you would like. So in this case, I have a slider and a graph, but you can obviously build up on this. And these objects are rendered in order. So if I preferred that the slider was below the graph, then I would just simply move the graph higher up into this HTML div object. So yeah, it's all based on HTML. So if you're already familiar with that, then this will probably be quite easy for you to, like, a very low learning curve. And then how we specify what should happen when the user interacts with the app is with these callbacks. So you specify a callback, and then you specify the function that should be executed on the callback. So you can see here, this callback is taking in a selected year, which comes from the slider, and then it's updating the figure shown below. Okay, so I think that's everything that I wanted to say about Plotly. Oh, except okay, one quick thing, just how you would export the code. So it's very straightforward, very similar to Matplotlib, which is just, write HTML or write image, and you just specify the name of the image. So that's, I guess, the last ingredient for this. So yeah, thank you so much, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that was great. It was very interesting to see how expressive Plotly can be compared to the typical matplotlib that everyone else would use. I'm sure everyone else is going to have a lot of value out of this. I haven't seen any questions in the chat, but I imagine if people have any questions now, then you feel free to unmute and ask away.
I'll just reshare the link while we wait for anyone.
Hi, Ami.
Hi.
Thank you so much for the talk. It was nice. I have a
Pleasure.
question. I want to ask, the file you imported, is it in TXT format or Excel?
Do you mean in this data frame?
Yeah.
Okay, so I actually didn't import it from a file. It's just a data set that's available within the Plotly library, the Plotly Express library. So it's just like a demo data set that they include. So if you have Plotly installed, you should be able to just run this line and it should automatically give you the data frame. Does that help?
Okay, I mean, if you have your own data that you want to practice with, is it supposed to be in TXT format or
Okay.
Excel format? Yeah.
Okay. So in that case, it depends. It doesn't actually have to be in any particular format. You just need to make sure that you load it correctly. So if you're going to use pandas, then you would use something like, let's say it was a CSV file, and I'm just using that example because that's the one that I can remember off the top of my head. You would use, if I'm not mistaken, like load CSV. So that's like something that you would do outside of the sort of Plotly framework. So maybe you would have like your notebook where you process your data, you load your data, and then after that you would run the Plotly functions. I kind of gave this talk assuming that maybe people were already familiar with pandas. But yeah, pandas
Yeah.
is a great tool for loading data.
Yeah.
I hope
Thanks.
that helps.
Yeah, it does help. Thanks.
Okay, great. Hi, is there another question?
Yes, I have a question. Sorry, I can't see whether there's a put up your hand icon like in Teams.
Okay, I'm not sure.
Do you maybe have experience with submitting an interactive plot as a say supplementary figure to a journal? Do they accept that? Do they like that? Because sometimes it's difficult to explain something in 2D, which I understand they must print, but can I link that to a 3D Plotly image or something like that?
That's actually an amazing question, and I have no idea, actually, to be perfectly honest. I don't know. I guess it would depend on the journal, but if it were online, you might be able to do it. I don't know, Dean, do you have any idea on this? I guess it depends whether they would accept HTML, which I guess is typically not the case.
Yeah, I've heard there's some debate a lot for journals to kind of modernize, especially with the online format, that more journals are being called to do that. And some do work that way, where you can submit your HTML or Plotly, whatever interactive figure, but a lot are
Okay.
still stuck in the old ways. And then I don't really know how to
Catching up.
convert interactive
Okay.
plot into something that sits well as a static image.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, where I've mainly used this is for presentations, because it's great like for telling the story. But I mean, that's a great point. Like, especially if the data is complex, it's really useful if the user or the reader can just simply interact with it.
Okay. I think I'll try it and see if the journal accepts.
Exactly. I mean, you have, yes, you can get.
Thank you so much for the presentation.
Pleasure.
Are there any final questions from the audience? If not, then I hope that you all enjoyed. This meeting was recorded and it'll be put on the NITheCS YouTube channel, so we can place some comments afterwards. And otherwise, you can always reach out to anyone at NITheCS and we'll be happy to direct you to connect to the speaker. But yeah, it was a very informative talk, very useful. I'm sure the audience enjoyed it very much. I know I did. So thank you again, Amy, for presenting, and I hope that everyone enjoyed. With that, then yeah, I'll let you set you off for the rest of your day. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Dean. Bye. Thanks, everyone. Bye.